YouTuber books can run the gamut from straight up self help to what can reasonably be called, hey, I met a bunch of famous people. Sometimes it also is bad poetry as well, but we won't talk about that. Needless to say, because YouTubers are so varied and in so many different genres, the books that they come out with do not have a great reputation. However, that doesn't necessarily mean you should be put off a book just because a YouTuber puts it out. For instance, Roberto Blake. Now, if you haven't heard of Roberto, let me assure you he is not some prankster or just general weirdo vlogger. They are not to be trusted. Roberto is a guy who has built up a name for himself and an enormous community on YouTube by teaching people how to be YouTubers. It sounds kind of cyclical, but trust me, there is a big market for this type of content, and it is very helpful to smaller YouTubers like me. But as I found out, writing and creating visual content are not necessarily the same skill. You can be really good at one, but not good at the other, which is why a lot of really great YouTubers are not that great at books. So the question is, how did Roberto do? Hello, shameless writers. I'm Kristen McTiernan, the nonsense free editor here for your regular dose of writing wisdom. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about a different creator with a somewhat different reputation who also had an existing large platform. And we talked about all of the reasons why his book, despite his large platform, did not sell well and it really wasn't particularly well produced. That book fell into the category of motivational self help. Now, self help is a very large genre, but what you may not know is that it has a lot of different teeny tiny subgenres. But really, there are only two main subgenres, I guess you could say. The first one is what we talked about with Tate's book, and that is motivational self help. The second type, which is what Roberto's book falls into, is definitely in the instructional self help genre. Instructional self help is in some ways very different from motivational self help in terms of how it's structured, in terms of how you need to do the actual writing, and in terms of the audience that you are appealing to. In many ways, it's harder. The reason it's harder is because you can't just be any Joe Schmo off the street with crystals and some great ideas about how the world ought to be. You have to come with skills and knowledge. In addition to that, you also have to be able to clearly communicate those skills and knowledge to someone who may not have the same background that you have. Sometimes instructional self help is written for an audience that assumes some kind of baseline knowledge. But most of the time, instructional self help is an expert explaining to absolute beginners how they got so good at what they do. Roberto Blake wrote, hold on, let me read the actual title, Create Something Awesome, How Creators Are Profiting from Their Passion in the Creator Economy. Look at that keyword stuff title. Take notes. That's how you do it. I hate it. I hate it. As a creative writer, I hate the rules of copywriting, but that's how you sell ebooks. We talked about it with Tate, how his title sucked and he wasn't going to find any new audience and he wasn't going to find any buyers who didn't already know who he was. This guy, he's going to find people because he did his title properly. Full marks, Roberto. Well done. Now that we've established that Roberto did good on the title, and the cover design is really awesome as well, I'll go ahead and say it. What about the content? Even for someone with a blogging and copywriting history like Roberto, the interior of a book, which is still a work of creative writing, which is different than blogging, can be harder to pull off. So let's see how we did. First, let's talk about the actual writing. The thing about any kind of a self-help, particularly instructional self-help, is there's kind of a formula to it in how you introduce the book. The first thing that always comes is a preface or a author's introduction, however you want to title it. And this serves three purposes that have to be established before you dive into your main book. You have to tell the audience who this book is for, what this book will teach them, and why you, the author, are the person that the reader should be listening to. Roberto hits all three of these out of the park. He does this in a couple of places, as you can see on the screen. The first one, 10 years ago, I was an employee just making over $30,000 a year. And with little more than a blog and access to YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, I was able to build a profitable personal brand from my passion and my creative skills. Today, I have a multiple six-figure business, and in 2020, I found myself making $300,000 a year. This is going right for the throat, saying, hey, you person who's maybe making $25,000 at a job that you hate, please don't imagine that you can't get to where I am now because I was where you were. So very clearly communicates what you're going to learn. Throughout this book, you'll learn how people just like you and me are building powerful online brands and businesses from their bedrooms using free tools and platforms. That's important. There's a temptation, particularly if you're like me and you are overly wordy, to make the introduction complicated. Oh, I don't want to just come out and say it. I don't want to just slap it right there on the page. Oh, in this book, I'm going to teach you. Yes, that's how you phrase it. Because this genre is, I don't want to say mercenary, but it's a little bit more transactional. This person isn't necessarily interested in you. They didn't pick up your book because they think you're pretty. They got your book because there's something very specific that they want to learn. And here's another thing about the preface or the author's introduction. This is what they're going to see when they hit that little look inside button on Amazon. This is what they're going to be reading. And so this is a sales pitch. You are saying this book will teach you. And here is how I know it will work because it worked for me. Very, very important. This is the age of digital book buying. Do not get overly flowery with your introduction. Structure, format, and layout are also very strong in Roberto's book. Another thing that I dinged Tate's book on was its lack of chapter order and any cohesion therein. I recommended that they use a reverse funnel in terms of ordering the chapters. That way we're going from very broad subjects to very narrow ones. And that gives the reader the ability to jump around as they need, but it also paints a very clear picture from beginning to end to the reader who reads it straight through. Roberto knocked this out of the park. The chapters are ordered masterfully. He also makes very good use of appendices. Now, if you are an instructional self-help author and you are giving granular instructions the way Roberto is, such as camera settings, makes the head spin. And it's not for everybody. Not everybody is at that spot. That is exactly what an appendix is for. It is extra material that some readers might find interesting and will want to reference over and over, and some readers might not. Hence why it goes at the end. Now, in speaking about structure, I do want to give everybody a little bit of warning. For the Kindle version, which for books like this, that's going to be the majority of your sales. Kindle has this weird thing where they bring the reader directly to chapter 1. They skip that glorious preface. They skip your front matter where you acknowledge everybody who helped you along the way, that beautiful dedication to your wife or to your children. They skip all of that. And they skip the TOC because, yeah, who needs that? Seriously, Amazon, get your crap together. Now, if you are self-publishing and you are using Kindle Create, which I cannot recommend strongly enough to create your ebook, you do have the option to decide where your reader is dumped into the book when they first open your book file. I always say, look at my cover, please. I paid good money for it. That is where you will start. And I don't care if you don't like flipping past the acknowledgments. You will read them and you will like it. Normally in this section, I talk about typos and grammatical errors because let's face it, a lot of books still have those. Roberto's is remarkably clean. He obviously used an editor, and based on what he said on Twitter, I know that he wrote this himself. So full marks there, no use of a ghostwriter, and hiring an editor just like you're supposed to. Well done. Very clean manuscript. There were a few issues, and it seems like somebody thinks that hyphens are optional. A lot of people think this. I'm not even going to get mad at you, and I don't know why people think this, but they're not. They're not optional. You have to use hyphens. There. That's been my weird editor hang up for the day. Now, I don't want to get too effusive in my praise because there were some drawbacks. Well, really, there was really only one, and it was mostly in the early chapters, and that was length. Here's the deal about personal information about yourself. We talked about how it's very important, but you don't want to go overboard on it. Just like fiction authors struggle with info dumping, they'll have 4 to 5 paragraphs in a row just talking about backstory of their world. That's very annoying, and especially in today's world where you can just return a book immediately, it's very ill-advisable in terms of your overall book profiting. In the same way, for nonfiction authors, you have to balance between telling personal anecdotes from your own rise and giving them actionable information, especially with this type of self-help. There were several chapters in Roberto's book that were just way, way too long and way too stuffed with personal information, and it starts to make the eyes glaze over. The creator economy chapter in particular was really lengthy, and it could have used a good chop. Just like fiction authors with backstory, I recommend sprinkling in your own personal backstory and your own personal rise and the skills that you learned along the way. Maybe 3 or 4 sentences at a time. So it's not bad. It definitely didn't ruin the book, but I would have taken a heavier red pen to it and bathed in your tears. And last, but certainly not least, we're going to talk about the value of the content. With most other genres, even if your content isn't particularly valuable per se, as long as it's entertaining, your reader can still feel like they got their money's worth. This is particularly true with motivational self-help, which you might have guessed from watching this video, but I personally don't read that. I don't need you to tell me how to feel about myself, and I'm not going to pay you money to do it, Rachel. Instructional self-help, however, when it comes to the value of it and your reader feeling like they got their money's worth, there's only one way to do that, and that is to bring the knowledge, to inform them of something they didn't know to begin with, and to live out the promises that you made on your back cover blurb. Roberto does that. If anything, he provided way more information than I, at this present moment in my YouTube path, can use. But it was fantastic information. And you can tell that this is years worth of knowledge very clearly put into the book and written in an entertaining way. The content is fantastic. And you can tell by the reviews that the people who read it found value in it. They were happy they bought it. And that is exactly what you want from your readers. Another thing you want from your readers is to have them trust you and the information that you provide. That way, if you have a subscription program, if you have more expensive, big ticket paid items, they will feel comfortable buying those from you because now they know that you're not just some online entertainer with no substance behind the mask. No, they know that you have good information that is worth their money, that is worth their time. For some reason, there's a certain retinue of people who think that it's tacky to try and upsell in a nonfiction book, but it's not. Because here's the thing, the nonfiction book is the entry level point. This book is helpful for large, broad audience, but then there's a much smaller audience who will also find value in that book, who is ready to pay more for better and more specialized information. There is nothing tacky about pitching your higher price services in an ebook. Now, Roberto does that. And here's another reason that the Kindle thing is a problem, because he had several of his links to free content, mind you, not upcharging, at the beginning. But because of the way Kindle behaved, it skipped all that. Very annoying. So if you're going to do an upcharge saying, hey, I have a subscribers only program, or hey, I have a course that costs this amount of money and it's available twice a year and you can get it here. You want to do that at the end of your book. And you also want to specify who it's for, because it's not going to be for everyone who buys your book, and that's okay. But it's going to be for some of the people who buy your book. Nonfiction books are very often written by professionals who have a business that is not writing. The ebook is just one pillar of their business model. So it makes sense that that one pillar will be used to funnel people to the other pillars. The next question for all of you nonfiction authors is, what do you think of instructional self-help? Do you think it's a barrier that's too high for you to actually surmount? Do you think that motivational self-help is actually the way to go because it's for a more general audience? I would love to hear your thoughts about the self-help genre below. And if you have any favorites that you think I should read, I would also like to hear those. So that's all I have for this week. Until next time, take care and write well.